Although societies have always had interaction and expansion of economic systems since 8000 BC to the present, it has changed over time and that interactions between systems have advanced and the world has become more interconnected than ever before.
Prior to 8000 BC, humans lived in nomadic societies, and their method of feeding themselves was through hunting and gathering. Now a word from John Green.
Let's go to the thought bubble. So 15,000 years ago, humans were foragers and hunters. Foraging meant gathering fruits, nuts, also wild grains and grasses. Hunting allowed for a more protein-rich diet, so long as you could find something with meat to kill. By far the best hunting gig in the prehistoric world, incidentally, was fishing.
As the Neolithic era went on, pastoralist societies emerged in which useful animals such as dogs, sheep, goats, and pigs were domesticated. Trade during this time was basic bartering. By 8000 BCE, societies began to adopt agriculture as their main source of food. Societies were now able to abandon their hunter-gathering lifestyles and replace it with a more reliable food source. The adoption of agriculture in many parts of the world led to food surpluses, which prior to this time were all but non-existent. The settled lifestyle led to the accumulation of wealth and introduction of private property. Settled agricultural civilizations began trading with each other along water routes. This in turn allowed specialization of labor, which contributed to the development of money-making industries. The first of these settled civilizations was Mesopotamia, which emerged between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They developed a wide network of trade, which extended from the Middle East to North Africa and through the Indian Ocean. Commodities such as grains and oils were traded. This can be seen as the beginning of trans-regional trade.
During this time period, infrastructure was beginning to be created which highly influenced the interaction of economic systems. Such infrastructure included examples such as the Royal Road and the Silk Road. The Royal Road was created by the Persians to ensure a means of passage between their various cities. The Persians also used coinage, which is believed to have been created by the Lydians who they conquered.
On the other end of the spectrum is China, the Persians' neighbors. The Han period in China had a strong economy, mainly due to the monopoly that they had on silk production and its transport over the Silk Road, which stretched from China all the way to Rome.
So this is a t-shirt. It was designed in Belgium and contains cotton from both Brazil and Texas, which was turned into cloth in China, stitched in Haiti, screen printed in Washington, sold to me in Indiana, and now that I am too fat to wear it, it will soon make its way to Cameroon or Honduras or possibly even back to Haiti. Can we just pause for a moment to consider the astonishing fact that most t-shirts see more of the world than most of us?
Mr. Green makes some good points here because how interaction has remained constant and that goods are shipped around the world to different countries today. This was particularly the case in Han China, except the process was not as extensive.
China traded with various countries to sell their precious silk as well as spices, pottery, salts, fireworks, and jade. The Silk Road is similar to today when many items are imported from other countries that produce items like the common Made in China label. Although today, unlike Han China, the process is much faster and there are more products other than just silk. In addition, transportation improvements have developed to increase productivity.
Another economic interaction during this time period includes the Indian Ocean Maritime Network, which utilized the dhow, a sailing vessel, to trade goods to all countries in contact with this ocean. What made all this trade possible for the most part are bureaucracies. Bureaucracies made tax collection more efficient and intrusive and created economic systems in the first place.
The time between 600 and 1450 was characterized by trans-regional trade on a massive scale, and the emergence of institutions to regulate trade and commerce. Trade and commerce became a larger part of the European economy. Political stability made banking, the movement of goods, and the creation of markets more convenient. Banking made trade more feasible and dependable.
Trade in the Baltic was dominated by the Hanseatic League, a group whose influence stretched from England in the west to Russia in the east. The League was created to protect economic interests and diplomatic privileges in the cities and countries and along the trade routes the merchants visited. Powerful banking houses were run by the Medicis in Italy and the Fuggers in Central Europe.
Another important area was Mali, which was an important north-south trade route for centuries. Mali's products were highly valued. They included gold, salt, ivory, animal skins, and slaves. The chief outpost was Timbuktu.
Mali's most powerful ruler was Mansa Musa, who was one of the world's wealthiest monarchs. His pilgrimage to Mecca was devastating to the economy in the Middle East and Africa because the influx of gold devalued the metal, which resulted in superinflated prices on goods. Currently in Mali, the economic outlook is bright, unlike after Mansa Musa's pilgrimage. Mali also trades all over the world rather than just interregionally.
1450 through 1750 was characterized economically by incorporation of the Americas into networks of exchange, an increase of productivity and exploitation of the Americas.
When the conquistadors landed in Latin America, they were there for three things: God, gold, and glory. Many of these conquistadors ravaged the Americas due to their thirst for power.
For 2 years, a band of Spanish conquistadors has been traveling in search of gold and glory.
A second example of economic interaction is the Atlantic slave trade, which brought cheap labor for the Europeans to exploit for their benefit.
But Africans were living in all kinds of conglomerations, from small villages to city-states to empires, and they were much too powerful for the Europeans to just conquer. And in fact, Europeans obtained African slaves by trading for them.
The Europeans had an easy time of controlling the Africans because their own brethren were enslaving and trading them for precious goods. European control in the New World turned into imperialism. European countries began to exploit their colonies for their raw materials and selling them back at inflated rates. This practice is called mercantilism.
A current situation that relates to this is the crisis in Ukraine. Although their situation is not directly economic, Russia has a large amount of influence because there are corrupt officials. This in turn allows them to exploit Ukraine as if it were a colony. This time period is characterized by a massive increase in industrialization, as well as the dominant economic organization of free trade capitalism, which is not controlled by a designated authority. The factories that were used during the Industrial Revolution often employed children and women that were paid much less than men. This put men out of work and generated many issues in society. The effects of industrialization gave way to the prosperity of capitalism. This time period we are experiencing has been characterized by radical forms of government, significant degrees of modernization, and the increase of globalization. After the turn of the century, the U.S. suffered from an economic downturn known as the Great Depression. During this time, areas suffered from common unemployment as well as poverty. This event is similar to the 2007 recession recently, when the economies of many countries were damaged. During this period, the world wars were also started and affected the entire world's economies. The effect of these wars was costly to many countries involved. Britain had been a major creditor until the start of World War I, but the cost of the war made it become indebted to the United States, changing the economic center from London to New York. This situation shows how economic systems continue to change based on the times. Countries in Europe also suffered greatly in both wars because the damaged property cost the countries large amounts to repair. It is estimated that just in World War II, the money spent by the countries participating was over $1.6 trillion, which had a substantial effect on how the economies of these countries were seen in the world view. In the post-World War era, consumer demand in America grew again due to the increase in workers and consumers. And during this time, the automobile and electronic production increased, resulting in more trade with other countries for materials and goods. During this period, many countries also experimented with communist economies, such as Cuba, the Soviet Union, China, and Eastern Europe. Communist economies are organized by a totalitarian state which controls the economy, quite the opposite of free trade capitalism. But the world began to move away from such ideals. Now the world is more globalized. An example of how the world has become more globalized can be seen with the recent storm that overtook the Philippines a few months back. Following the aftermath of the typhoon, foreign governments came to the aid of the residents of the Philippines to help them get back on their feet. According to a recent article, the president of the Philippines has high hopes for the economy of the country and that now is the most opportune time for foreign investment in Philippine business. This situation depicts how countries receive more financial support due to globalization. Throughout world history, interactions of economic systems have gone from simple barter to free trade capitalism. These advances have made the world more interconnected, leading to mass amounts of cultural diffusion as well as globalization.